The women of Dandadan are surprisingly real, and it's because they're more than just women. We look at female characters as cool or hot, but this isn't how you make real characters. The problem is those are examples of images. Instead of focusing on how everyone else sees a character, the goal should be making characters that are defined by more than just their image. Dandadan has women that are cool and women that are hot, but it also fleshes out these characters with their own individual experiences that make them unlike any other character in the story. As a result, Dandadan is able to deliver a diverse cast of genuine female characters who each represent an authentic aspect of being a woman. Now, some of you may point out the elephant in the room and say, Ouji, you're a dude. What would you know about being a woman? And it is true that as a man, I can never fully understand what it means to be a woman. But as someone who's been influenced by their mother and sister from a young age, I know what it's like to live with strong women. And as someone who has seen a lot of female characters in movies and TV, I know enough to at least tell the difference between a female character that works and a female character that's just plain cringe. When it comes to the female characters in Dandadan, we can clearly see that there's some do's and don'ts. The biggest don't of writing female characters is reducing them to their image. This is something that a lot of people criticize shonen manga for because usually female characters are reduced to the sex symbol, or the love interest, or the woman who's also a badass. None of these things are inherently wrong, but what people don't like about these kinds of characters is that these traits make up their entire identity. It makes them feel one-dimensional, and it makes their role in the story feel secondary to the other characters. Like I said before, Dandadan has all of these things. It has love interests, it has badass women, and it even has a character like Queen that dresses boldly and isn't afraid to show her body. But Dandadan makes it work because these are just one of many qualities each of these characters possesses, so their roles in the story are much more meaningful. But some of you might hear that and point to the assault scenes in Dandadan to argue that Dandadan is no different than any other manga. And let's just be clear, these are not fan service scenes. The scene with the alien probing and the scene at the hot spring, those are assault scenes. And some people feel like they happen too often in Dandadan with no real consequences. And because of that, it might seem like we're doing these kinds of scenes purely to shock viewers. That being said, Dandadan makes it very clear that this kind of behavior is always bad. It's never a goofy old man doing it and we laugh it off. It's not the main character doing it and then we're like, oh well, that's just what he does. It's always shown as objectively creepy and unacceptable behavior. So sure, Tatsu could spend the time to explore how these scenes affect Momo, but the fact that he chooses not to doesn't undermine all of the other great writing for his characters. In fact, while he doesn't do this for Momo, he does do this for another female character, Koki. I won't say too much just for spoiler reasons, but basically what happens is we find out this character Koki took a scandalous picture of herself because she felt alone and she didn't feel good about herself. And when one of the adults at school finds out about it, they actually use it against her to blackmail her. We then spend the next 15 chapters or so exploring how this makes Koki feel trapped before she eventually reclaims her identity and practically becomes a brand new character. Koki's not the only example of this kind of characterization. One of the first examples of this is Turbo Granny. After the main characters finally defeat her, we find out from Saiko that Turbo Granny is a yokai that lives near areas of unsolved murders, specifically murders of young girls. In fact, every time the spirit mediums encountered Turbo Granny, she was always near spirits of girls who died horrific deaths. This actually created a bit of debate when this episode aired, because lots of people thought this was great characterization for Turbo Granny, but some people argued that it was a cheap way to humanize a villain. Basically, they didn't buy that just because she hung around dead people that she was somehow this feminist icon. But those people completely missed the point. Hanging around the ghosts of girls doesn't make Turbo Granny a saint, but it does show respect and solidarity for young girls who were targeted and made to be victims. Even if Turbo Granny is an evil ghost, you can at least respect her desire to be there for victims with nobody to count on. If anything, this makes Turbo Granny an even better character. She's not just a purely evil villain, but she's also not just a defender of women. She's both of these things. She also swears a lot lot. She likes to play baseball with Saiko. She likes to pig out on good food. The reason Dandadan's female characters stand out from other mainstream anime is because Tatsu uses a combination of female experiences as well as many other quirks that aren't necessarily tied to the character's gender. The idea is to write well-rounded characters that aren't defined by a single idea or image. It's the same reason why everyone loves Spider-Gwen from Spider-Verse, but nobody really likes She-Hulk, at least from the TV show. She-Hulk is a character with a number of unique traits. She's smart, she's stubborn, she's passionate about her career as a lawyer, all things that make her unique from Bruce Banner. But the whole point of her character feels like she's supposed to be the Hulk but a woman. In particular, there's a scene where Bruce is teaching her how to control her anger, but she's all like, listen man, I'm a woman and I'm a lawyer, so I do this all the time and I'm better at it than you. And then of course she proves Bruce's point by immediately turning into the Hulk. On one hand, it's like, okay, valid, women do put up with a lot, but at the same time, this is a really unappealing portrayal of a character that people actually like in the comics, and it's because they take everything about her and just reduce it to she's a lawyer who's also a woman. In contrast, everyone loves Spider-Gwen in the Spider-Verse movies, and funny enough, her gender is barely a part of her character. Obviously, she stands out as a female Spider-Man, but it's never made out to be her entire identity. Instead, we focus on everything else about her, like how she lost her friend, or how she cares for Miles and stands up for him, or how she likes to make jokes like the other Spider-Men. It all goes back to the do's and don'ts I mentioned before. When it comes to writing any character, not just female characters, you shouldn't just reduce them to their image. When it comes to female characters, the common mistake is that writers reduce them to the girl character, or the hot character, or whatever. This is why female characters in Dandadan are so good, because they all have unique experiences and none of them can be reduced to a single idea. These characters are well liked because they have different female experiences that women can relate to, but they also have many other qualities that anyone can enjoy regardless of their background. Momo is the obvious example because of the fact that she's a tomboy. Nobody likes her because she's a psychological or complex character. We like her because of her many personality traits. She's conventionally feminine, but she also likes to wear girly clothes, and she likes masculine men like Ken Takakura, but she also represents a lot of unconventional qualities that a lot of people relate to. She usually just wears oversized sweaters when she's home. She likes series like Golgo 13 and Kamen Rider. Her hair isn't always perfectly brushed, and it's not uncommon to see her with her hair in a giant rat's nest. She isn't the smartest character, but she takes an interest in all of Okarune's conspiracies, and she's an underrated genius who's always coming up with great ideas. At the same time, she's brutish, abrasive, and isn't afraid to start a fight. She's not a complex character. She's not even an original take on tomboys, but everyone likes Momo because she's a character with many different layers, so she feels like a character we've never truly met before. Now, of course, while Momo is the character that stands out the most, Dandadan has a lot of other great female characters. Ira is the counterpart to Momo, who's always butting heads with her. While Momo is portrayed as the tomboy, Ira is clearly meant to be the more conventionally feminine character, the popular girl, or if you've seen Mean Girls, the plastic. But this isn't her entire character. She comes off as a character whose entire purpose is to win over Okarune, but she's got plenty of other traits. She acts as the team leader of the group who often organizes her friends when they're fighting a big monster. She has a rivalry with Momo because they're both strong characters and they're more alike than they realize. She loves to spend time with Mr. Shrimp's son, Baby Shrimp, and she even played piano when she was a kid before she won a contest and quit while she was ahead. Of course, Tatsu also does a great job writing the many side characters. We already talked about Koki. Rin is another character that represents following the rules and fitting in as she's the class president and naturally wants everyone else to follow the rules as well. But when she gets her own yokai powers, she expresses a desire to use her own voice and be more creative. There's also Vamola, the alien girl who's really just a goofball, but slowly becomes a regular part of the main team and eventually becomes everyone's protective sister. Also, she likes to imitate Gigi. By this point, you should be able to see why everyone loves these characters. They each have their own experiences that female readers can recognize and admire, but they have so many other quirks that make them more than just female characters. Now, to that point, you might argue that this is a pretty lame example of female characters because they're all young girls. In other words, Tatsu doesn't actually know how to write real women with real problems. First of all, if you think that, then that's a pretty reductive way to view these characters. Second of all, there's several grown-up characters in the story. Saiko serves as the single grandparent who lost her kids and treats Momo like her own kid. She also knows how to fight, she loves her TV shows, and she loves to treat Momo and her friends to dinner. I already mentioned Turbo Granny, but what I didn't mention is how she's like an aunt to Momo. Not literally, but like, you know how there's those certain women in your life that aren't really your aunt, but they're pretty boss and they're like a second mom to you? Yeah, those are aunties. And that's exactly what Turbo Granny is to Momo. She looks after Momo when Saiko isn't around, and she often mentors her. Plus, Momo starts to look up to her when she finds out about Turbo Granny consoling the ghosts of murder victims. Granted, neither of these characters are perfect. Saiko is strong and intelligent, but she has some of the most fan service in the series. And like we said before, Turbo Granny is still an evil ghost. But does anyone really care? As a matter of fact, in a funny way, it always seems to be the women that are clearly flawed that always pop up as feminine icons. For example, a lot of women love Marilyn Monroe. Obviously, she was a pretty scandalous person, but a lot of women like her despite her flaws. They look at her not as a scandalous girl, but as a beautiful woman who lived her life in spite of the men around her. It's the same reason so many women love Carmela Soprano, yet nobody really likes Skylar from Breaking Bad. Skylar is clearly the better person, but nobody likes her because, quite frankly, she comes off as kind of a bitch. Carmela is objectively a bad person, as she condones her husband's criminal activity and has no problem living in his house and using his money. But people don't see her as just a mob wife. A lot of women picture her as a great mother who cooks these amazing dinners for her families and would do anything for her kids. Evidently, you don't have to write characters with perfect morals for people to like them. In fact, people seem to love characters because of who they are, despite their flaws. And especially in the case of female characters, we don't like them because they're icons. We like them because they're individuals. We don't like Saiko because she's a hot grandma. We like her because she's a strong grandmother. We don't like Turbo Granny just because she's an evil ghost. We also like her because she's a mentor and an auntie. The same can even be said for a minor character like Queen Sensei. Queen is drawn in a way that is very clearly meant to appeal to the male gaze, but that isn't her entire character. She clearly cares for the kids at school, and as we find out later on, she even helps the kids to the point where she borders on having potential spirit medium powers. Plus, it wouldn't be crazy to say Queen is a Marilyn Monroe type character. She wears a scandalous outfit, but she embraces her looks instead of shying away from them. You could argue that she's just there for fan service, but considering Tatsu brought her back like 100 chapters later just to flesh out her character and make her even more likable, it's safe to say there's more to her character. And that's why people love the female characters in Dandadan. They aren't reduced to the girl characters or the hot characters or the badasses that also happen to be women. They have experiences that a lot of women can relate to, but they have so many other layers that make them unique individuals. While they feel similar to other characters, these quirks make them each feel like characters we've never seen in other stories. And this is done without trying to make them icons or reduce them to their gender. And that is why everyone loves the women of Dandadan.